All right, so welcome to the deep dive. Today we're heading north, for a deep dive into Canada.
North of the border.
Yeah, north of the border.
Right.
And we're going way beyond, the stereotypes like maple syrup and hockey, all that stuff.
Right.
And really trying to uncover what it truly means to be Canadian. And to do that, we're going to be using, get this, the Discover Canada Study Guide, which is, the official handbook for those applying for Canadian citizenship.
Yeah, it's a fascinating document, really. It's way more than just like a test prep tool. It's like a guide to the values and history and kind of the institutions that shape the Canadian experience.
Yeah, it's like, okay, so you want to be Canadian. Well, this is what you need to know.
This is what it means.
This is what it means to be one of us. Yeah, exactly. So I'm thinking even if, we're not planning on becoming Canadian citizens anytime soon, this deep dive could be a fascinating look into a country, that we think we know.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's so much in here that's surprising, even for someone like me who's spent some time studying Canada. The guide really emphasizes the idea of embracing democratic principles and understanding the rights and responsibilities that come with being Canadian.
Yeah, and right off the bat, I mean, in the introduction, there's this fascinating historical detail that I had no idea about. That Canada was the first province in the British Empire to actually take steps towards abolishing slavery.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And the guide doesn't, dive too deep into the why behind it, but by placing this historical fact right at the beginning, it seems to be signaling a commitment to equality and justice as like core values.
Yeah, right. Like right away, boom, here we go.
Right out of the gate.
Here's what's important to us. It makes you kind of wonder what the social and political dynamics were like back then that allowed Canada to be a pioneer in this movement. I don't know, we might have to do some additional digging on that later on, but for now, let's kind of go back to the beginning. The guide talks about the three founding peoples of Canada.
Yeah.
Can you kind of unpack that concept for us?
Sure. So we're talking about the Aboriginal peoples, the French, and the British.
Right.
And each group has, a distinct history and culture, and their interactions, sometimes harmonious, sometimes not, have really shaped Canada's identity in some pretty profound ways.
Yeah, it's like a giant cultural tapestry woven from these three, distinct threads.
Mhm.
So let's start with the Aboriginal peoples.
Okay.
The guide points out that they've been connected to this land for thousands of years, long before European settlers arrived.
Absolutely. I mean, their history, traditions, spiritual connection to the land are really integral to understanding Canada.
Yeah.
The guide encourages newcomers to learn about the diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis cultures that exist across the country.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that the history we often learn in school is just one perspective.
Right.
And usually the one told by the victors. And this guide seems to be acknowledging that and encouraging a more nuanced understanding of the past. But speaking of European arrivals, let's move on to the French. I mean, they brought a whole lot more than just, croissants and wine, right?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the French influence is deeply embedded in Canadian society, particularly in Quebec, where French is the official language,
Right.
and the culture thrives. But their impact extends beyond language. You think about law, art, architecture, and even the Canadian love of good food and conversation.
It's amazing how even after centuries, these cultural imprints remain. And of course, we can't forget the British. They left their mark on Canada too, right?
Without a doubt. I mean, the constitutional monarchy, the parliamentary system, common law, these are all legacies of British influence.
Right.
But it's interesting to see how Canada has adapted these systems to create something uniquely Canadian.
Yeah, so we have these three founding groups, each with their own, rich history and traditions, coexisting and sometimes clashing. And the guide even has this section called Struggle for a Continent, which sounds pretty intense.
Well, it was. I mean, for centuries, France and Great Britain were locked in this fierce rivalry for control of North America, and that played out pretty dramatically in what would become Canada.
And this is where I think we get to like the juicy stuff, like the battles and the heroes and maybe even a few scandals along the way.
We might have a few of those along the way, yeah.
But first, let's talk about how Canada even got its name. I mean, where did that come from?
So the name Canada actually comes from the Iroquoian word Kanata, which means village. Jacques Cartier, a French explorer, heard the word used to describe the area around present-day Quebec City,
Gotcha.
and it eventually stuck for the entire country.
So basically, Canada is named after a village. I mean, that's kind of charming in a way, don't you think?
It is. It's a reminder that even the grand narratives of nations often have,
Yeah.
these humble beginnings, and it
Hmm.
highlights the role of Indigenous languages and cultures in shaping Canadian history, even in seemingly small ways.
I love these little details, it makes history feel more real, more relatable.
Yeah.
But speaking of shaping history, the guide then takes us to the War of 1812, which, was a conflict that seemingly solidified Canada's separate identity from the United States.
Right. It's a pivotal point in the Canadian narrative, a moment when the fledgling nation proved it could stand on its own.
Okay, so this is where I need some context here. Um, what exactly was the War of 1812 all about, and why was it so crucial for Canada?
Well, imagine this. It's the early 1800s. Napoleon is causing chaos in Europe,
Right.
and Britain's caught in the crossfire. Now, the U.S. isn't exactly thrilled with Britain interfering with their trade as part of these Napoleonic Wars,
Okay.
and they see an opportunity. They figure, you know what, conquering Canada, that'll be a walk in the park.
So the classic tale of underestimation. I
Yeah.
can I can already sense this isn't going to end well for the
Well,
Americans.
the guide emphasizes that this was a real David and Goliath situation, with Canadian volunteers, First Nations allies, and British troops banding together to defend their land against this much larger force.
All right. Okay, I'm already rooting for the underdogs here. Um, so the guide mentions some key battles that kind of turned the tide of the war. Can you walk us through some of those?
Absolutely.
Oh,
So early on, there was the capture of Detroit,
okay.
which was a huge morale booster for the British and Canadian forces. It showed that the Americans weren't invincible.
Yeah. It's funny how like a single victory can just shift the entire momentum of a war,
Right.
like a psychological turning point.
Absolutely.
So what else? What other battles were important?
Well, then there was the defense of Queenston Heights, which was a brutal battle near Niagara Falls. It was a victory for the British and Canadians, but it came at a cost.
Okay.
Major General Sir Isaac Brock, a key British commander, was killed in action.
So a bittersweet victory then.
Yeah.
It seems like even in defending their land, Canadians faced significant sacrifices.
Absolutely. And the guide also highlights individual acts of heroism, like the story of Laura Secord.
Oh yeah, Laura Sickler. I mean, she's practically a Canadian legend, right?
She is. She's celebrated for her bravery and patriotism. In 1813, she overheard American soldiers discussing a surprise attack on British forces,
Okay.
and she set off on foot through miles of dense forest and swampy terrain to warn the British.
Hold on, hold on. How far did she walk?
19 miles.
19 miles. That's like running a marathon but through a wilderness,
I know.
and all to save her country from a sneak attack. I mean, that's some next level dedication right there.
Her journey was grueling, but she succeeded in delivering the warning, and the British were able to repel the American attack at the Battle of Beaver Dams.
Wow.
It's a testament to the courage and resilience of those who fought for Canada.
It's stories like this that really just make history come alive. You can really sense the determination of those early Canadians. But the guide also mentions a darker side to this conflict, the burning of York, which is now Toronto.
Right. In 1813, American forces captured and burned York, including Government House and the Parliament buildings. It was a devastating blow.
So how did the British and Canadians respond to such a blatant attack?
Well, they retaliated,
Yeah.
and they did it in a way that made a lasting impression. The following year, British forces, including Canadian and Nova Scotian soldiers, attacked Washington, D.C.,
Okay.
and, well, they set fire to the White House.
Hold on. Seriously. I always thought the burning of the White House was like a purely British affair. I had no idea Canadians were involved.
It's a little-known fact,
Yeah.
but it highlights the intertwined nature of the conflict and the significant role Canadians played.
Right.
It was an act of retaliation that sent a clear message: don't mess with Canada.
Yeah, I can imagine. So what was the ultimate outcome of the War of 1812?
Well, in the end, the American attempt to conquer Canada failed.
Yeah.
The war solidified Canada's distinct identity and paved the way for the eventual formation of the nation we know today.
It's fascinating how this conflict, while born out of tension and struggle, ultimately forged this stronger sense of unity and purpose for Canada. It
Yeah.
seems like a defining moment in their national narrative.
Exactly. And the guide goes on to explore how this newfound sense of unity contributed to the development of democratic institutions in Canada. It was a gradual process, starting with small steps like the establishment of the first representative assembly in Halifax back in 1758.
So it was a gradual evolution from those early forms of self-government to the full-fledged democracy we see today.
Right.
What were some of the key milestones along the way?
The guide highlights the movement toward responsible government, which means that the government is accountable to the elected representatives of the people.
Yeah.
And figures like Sir Louis Hippolyte Lafontaine and Robert Baldwin were instrumental in championing this principle.
So it seems like this idea of government by the people for the people is deeply ingrained in the Canadian psyche.
Yeah, very much so.
But how did all these separate colonies, with their diverse histories and populations,
Yeah.
how did they eventually come together to form a single nation?
That's where the Fathers of Confederation come in.
Okay.
They're a group of visionary leaders who recognized the need for a stronger, more unified Canada. And they weren't afraid to roll up their sleeves and get to work.
So tell me more about these Fathers of Confederation.
Okay.
What were their goals, and how did they manage to pull off such a monumental task?
Well, between 1864 and 1867, they held a series of conferences, debated fiercely, and ultimately hammered out a deal to create the Dominion of Canada.
Okay.
They divided powers between a federal government and provincial governments,
Right.
laying the groundwork for a system that could accommodate regional differences
Yeah.
while fostering a sense of national unity.
Dominion of Canada, it sounds so official.
Yeah.
So grand. It makes you wonder where did that name come from?
Well, the guide actually explains this. Apparently, the name Dominion was inspired by Psalm 72 in the Bible, which speaks of dominion extending from sea to sea.
Wow, that's incredible. So the name itself reflects this vision of a vast and powerful nation stretching across the entire continent.
Yeah.
And to make it all official, the British Parliament passed the British North America Act in 1867, marking the birth of Canada as we know it. So July 1st, 1867 became Canada's birthday, originally celebrated as Dominion Day and later becoming the Canada Day we know today.
Precisely. It's a day to celebrate the unification of these diverse provinces and territories into a single nation.
It's remarkable how a country born out of such diverse influences managed to forge a unified identity. But what about the symbols that represent this new nation? I mean, the guide delves into some pretty interesting emblems that capture the Canadian spirit.
Right. It's fascinating how these symbols can encapsulate so much meaning and history. I mean, they're not just pretty pictures. They're visual reminders of Canada's past, its values, and its aspirations.
All right, so let's do a quick tour of Canadian symbolism. Give me the highlights.
Okay.
What are some of the most iconic emblems, and what do they represent?
Well, we have to start with the Canadian crown.
Okay.
It symbolizes Canada's history as a constitutional monarchy going all the way back to Confederation. And of course, the current monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, holds a special place in the hearts of many Canadians.
Long may she reign.
Indeed.
But what about the maple leaf? I mean, that seems like the quintessential Canadian symbol.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been a symbol of Canada for centuries, adorning everything from military uniforms to hockey jerseys to, of course, the Canadian flag.
Speaking of the flag, the guide mentions its evolution from the red ensign to the modern maple leaf design we know today.
Right. The adoption of the current flag in 1965 was a significant moment. It represented a shift toward a more distinct and modern national identity.
Yeah, it's amazing how a symbol design can hold so much meaning and evoke such strong emotions. What about the fleur-de-lis? I know that's a symbol deeply rooted in French history and culture.
It is, and it serves as a reminder of the enduring legacy of the French in Canada, particularly in Quebec, where it still proudly appears on the provincial flag. It's a symbol of their unique cultural identity within the larger Canadian mosaic.
I love how Canada embraces this multicultural heritage, you know? It's such a refreshing contrast to countries that try to impose a single homogenous identity.
Absolutely.
Speaking of embracing a vast and diverse land, the guide also mentions the Canadian coat of arms and the motto "Amari usk ad mer."
Yeah, which translates to from sea to sea.
Right. Yeah.
It's such a poetic way to capture the sheer vastness of the country.
It's more than just about geographical size, I think. I think it speaks to the idea of a united nation encompassing a multitude of cultures, landscapes, experiences, all connected by this shared identity.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's like a tapestry woven from all these different threads, yet held together by a common purpose. The guide also touches on some architectural treasures like the Parliament buildings and those stunning provincial
Sure.
legislatures.
Right. Yeah, they're more than just buildings. They're symbols of Canadian democracy, representing the heart of the nation's political life. They stand as monuments to the the values of dialogue, debate, and the peaceful pursuit of progress.
Okay, so I have to ask, did they mention hockey? Because come on, what's more Canadian than hockey?
Of course they did. The guide acknowledges hockey as a defining national sport, even mentioning the cultural significance of the Stanley Cup, the holy grail of hockey championships.
I love that they included the beaver too, such a hardworking little creature.
Yeah, the beaver's been a symbol of Canada for centuries, representing industriousness, resourcefulness, and harmony with nature. It seems fitting for a nation that has built a prosperous society in a challenging environment.
So we've journeyed through Canada's past, explored its founding peoples, and delved into its symbols. But but the guide doesn't stop there, does it? It also takes us into the world of modern Canada, a global player and a champion of diversity and multiculturalism.
It does.
So we'll have to save that for our next part.
Yeah, we'll pick it up there.
All right. Sounds good. It's amazing to think how Canada has evolved from this collection of colonies to a nation that's now a leading voice on the world stage.
Hmm.
So what does the guide tell us about modern Canada's, place in the world?
Well, it really emphasizes Canada's dedication to peace and security.
Okay.
It highlights their participation in the world wars, peacekeeping missions all across the globe,
Right.
and their membership in organizations like the British Commonwealth and the United Nations.
So it seems like they're really committed to fostering cooperation and diplomacy on an international level.
Yeah,
It makes me think about their close relationship with the United States too.
absolutely. That relationship is crucial. And the guide acknowledges its importance, particularly in trade.
Right.
Think NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Yeah.
Their economies are deeply interconnected.
It's interesting how they managed to maintain this strong partnership
Yeah.
while still forging their own independent path.
Yeah, yeah.
What about modern Canadian culture? Does the guide touch on that at all?
It does, but only briefly.
Okay.
It mentions the vibrant arts and culture scene
Right.
and highlights notable Canadian artists, writers, and athletes who've made a global impact.
It feels like we've only scratched the surface of what it means to be Canadian.
Yeah, it's a big topic.
There's so much history, so much diversity, and such a unique blend of influences.
Absolutely.
You know?
It's been a journey, that's for sure.
It has. It has.
What's fascinating to me is how this study guide, designed for newcomers, has also given us, I think, a fresh perspective
Mm-hmm.
on a country we thought we knew.
Right.
It's challenged us to think about the deeper meaning behind those iconic symbols and historical events.
Yeah, it's like holding up a mirror to our own assumptions and preconceptions.
Yeah.
We often take our neighbors for granted, but this deep dive has been a reminder that there's always more to learn, even about those closest to us.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And this raises an important question, though.
Oh.
What does the future hold for Canada?
Yeah.
How will they navigate the complexities of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples,
Yeah.
the changing demographics of the country,
Right.
the ever-evolving global landscape? I mean, these are big questions.
That's a thought-provoking point. It seems like the journey of defining Canadian identity is ongoing. There's this constant push and pull between tradition and progress,
Hmm?
between celebrating diversity and forging unity.
It's a balancing act, for sure.
Yeah, it is.
And it'll be interesting to see how Canada continues to evolve in the coming years.
Yeah. What stands out to you as the most significant takeaway from this deep dive?
What strikes me is this unique blend of pragmatism and idealism that seems to permeate Canadian culture. On one hand, they're grounded in a deep respect for history and tradition,
Yeah.
but on the other, they're forward-thinking, always driving for a more just and equitable society.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that tension, that dynamic interplay is what makes Canada so intriguing. You
Hmm.
know, they're not afraid to acknowledge their past mistakes, but they're also optimistic about the future and committed to making the world a better place.
It's a powerful combination.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. So for anyone listening who's feeling inspired to learn more about Canada, the study guide actually includes this really helpful for more information section with tons of resources.
Wow.
They mention websites like the Virtual Museum of Canada and
Hmm.
Parks Canada, which sound like great starting points.
Those are fantastic resources,
Yeah.
and I encourage everyone to dig deeper. Explore different perspectives and discover the richness and complexity of Canadian culture for themselves.
Well, folks, there you have it. Our deep dive into Discover Canada. We've explored the history, the values, the symbols, and even glimpsed into the future of this fascinating nation.
It's been quite a ride.
It has. We hope this has sparked your curiosity and maybe even inspired you to take your own journey of discovery.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the world around you.
We'll see you on the next deep dive. It's amazing to think how Canada has evolved from this collection of colonies to a nation that's now, a leading voice on the world stage.
Hmm.
So what does the guide tell us about modern Canada's place in the world?
What really emphasizes Canada's commitment, I guess you could say, to peace and security. It highlights their participation in the world wars, peacekeeping missions across the globe, and their membership in organizations like the British Commonwealth and the United Nations.
It seems like they're really committed to fostering cooperation and diplomacy on an international level. It makes me think about their close relationship with the United States too.
Absolutely. That relationship is crucial. The
Mm,
guide acknowledges its importance, particularly in trade. Think NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement.
right.
Their economies are deeply interconnected.
It's interesting how they managed to maintain this strong partnership while still forging their own independent path. What about modern Canadian culture? Does the guide touch on that at all?
It does, but only briefly.
Okay.
It mentions the vibrant arts and culture scene and highlights some notable Canadian artists, writers, and athletes who've made a global impact.
It feels like we've only just scratched the surface of what it means to be Canadian.
Yeah.
There's so much history,
Yeah.
so much diversity, and such a unique blend of influences.
It's a vast and complex country for sure.
What's fascinating to me is how this study guide designed for newcomers has also given us, I think, a fresh perspective on a country we thought we knew.
Yeah.
It's challenged us to think about the deeper meaning behind those iconic symbols and historical events.
I agree. It's easy to take things for granted when they're familiar.
Mm.
But stepping back and looking through the lens of this guide has really revealed some hidden depths, I think.
Yeah, it's like holding up a mirror to our own assumptions and preconceptions. We often take our neighbors for granted, but this deep dive has been a reminder that there's always more to learn, even about those closest to us.
Absolutely. And this raises an important question, though. What does the future hold for Canada?
Yeah.
How will they navigate the complexities of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples? The changing demographics of the country, the ever-evolving global landscape. I mean, these are big questions.
That's a thought-provoking point.
Yeah.
It seems like the journey of defining Canadian identity is ongoing.
Yeah.
There's this constant push and pull between tradition and progress, between celebrating diversity and forging unity.
Right. It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
And it'll be fascinating to see how Canada continues to evolve in the coming years.
What stands out to you as the most significant takeaway from this deep dive?
What strikes me is this unique blend of pragmatism and idealism that seems to permeate Canadian culture. On one hand, they're grounded in a deep respect for history and tradition.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they're forward-thinking, always striving for a more just and equitable society.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that tension, that dynamic interplay is what makes Canada so intriguing. They're not afraid to acknowledge their past mistakes, but they're also optimistic about the future and committed to making the world a better place.
It's an aspiring combination.
So for anyone listening who's feeling inspired to learn more about Canada, the study guide actually includes this really helpful for more information section with tons of resources.
Oh yeah, it's a great starting point.
They mention websites like the Virtual Museum of Canada and Parks Canada, which sound like great places to start.
Absolutely. And I would encourage everyone to dig deeper, explore different perspectives, and discover the richness and complexity of Canadian culture for themselves.
Well, folks, there you have it. Our deep dive into Discover Canada. We've explored the history, the values, the symbols, and even glimpsed into the future of this fascinating nation. We hope this has sparked your curiosity and maybe even inspired you to take your own journey of discovery north of the border.
Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the world around you.
We'll see you on the next Dig Dive.